Hello, everyone. This is BigReed with another episode of Gaming's Lost Memories, and today we will be talking about Ball Pit. This one's kind of a funny title. I was doing a little bit of research on it, and I think it was going to be called like World of Balls or something kind of funny. But if you've ever seen the anime Hunter x Hunter, you basically don't say the X, so the name's ball pit, but there's an X in between, kind of like signifying that it's like combining the two elements. It's kind of funny to think about that too, because with Hunter x Hunter, when I first saw the title, I was like Hunter x Hunter. I don't quite know what that means, but when me and my friends would talk about it, I would say the X. Uh, Funny side note, because Kenny's son is the developer. Let me verify this real quick. I think that's actually it says. What's his actual name here? Hold on. Yeah, no. So Kenny was the developer, or lead developer here. So when I was doing a little bit of research, I saw that Devolver Digital was producing it. So they were going to be basically publishing everything. And when I say producing, I think I meant publishing, so I apologize about that. But publishing the title, getting it out there, and if you go back, Devolver Digital basically makes like all of these. Or let me rephrase that. They're responsible for bringing to market so many amazing indie development games. And kind of in this podcast, what I wanted to talk about was indie games and kind of like my take on them, what I have seen from the video game industry in terms of how the game industry kind of started with independent development, kind of went away for a little bit and has come back. And honestly, some of my favorite games of the mid to late 2010s were indie developed games, which is kind of interesting. But if you really think about like where the video game industry is currently, I think there's a massive window for these types of games. And it's so fun seeing too. So a lot of different thoughts. I'm getting a little sporadic right now, so I kind of want to loop it back in. So Ball Pit is a ball breaking game that kind of combines a couple other indie developed games that I'm very familiar with, actually. So I kind of knew, and it was really funny talking to people about this and friends, and everybody's talking about Pokemon ZA, which we'll be doing a breakdown podcast of that too. But when we were throwing out games that we were excited for, there's like giant title, $50 million, $100 million game. Pokemon, Legends ZA, that's going to sell 6 million copies at launch. And I kept throwing Ball Pit out there. I'm like, no, I can already tell. I can see the art style. I can see the gameplay. Read a little bit about the dev history, saw who was publishing it. And I'm like, I can tell, like, this is a game. Like, I'm actually excited for this game. It's only $15 too, which is just quite interesting. But you can see, I like rogue light and like games, and that has become one of my most appreciated style of games to play. They're generally bite-sized. You can normally pick them up and play them. They have like an addictive quality, but I think most importantly, these styles of games and indie developed games in general have to focus almost solely on gameplay. Now, I'll be talking about Hades 2 here in another podcast in a couple of weeks as well, where there is a heavy focus on storytelling and dialogue and everything like that. But I think what's most impressive about this genre or this style of gameplay is it is focused on gameplay. And I think it kind of takes you back to a time like during the NES era, the Super Nintendo, just early developed games where you did have story as a driving factor to essentially complete the game, but the story never got in the way of gameplay. And if you've listened to this podcast before, if you haven't, that's fine too. Now, I really do like playing video games for their story. And what I mean by that is like you can read a book, you can watch a movie, but you're kind of only spending your time, you're not interacting with it. Like you're reading it and you're ingesting what's already there, but there's no change or player choice or impact that you have by being a player. Like, you could play a game like Mass Effect, which is one of my favorite story-based games of all time. And the way that I play the game versus the way that, another person plays the game in terms of story is going to be completely different. So it's not like reading a book where it's like, these are the words. You could have maybe a slightly different interpretation of it, but these are the words. You read them, they go into your brain, and that's basically it. And I think in the last like decade or so, there's been a heavy focus on roguelite games in particular that are retro themed. Now, Ball Pit, what cracks me up about this, and I know I keep bouncing around here, but I do want to talk about the X in between. So Hunter x Hunter, and this is just like a nerdy kind of throwback. I remember my friend watching Hunter x Hunter, and he like really liked that anime, and I'm like looking at the characters, and I have never been exposed to it. This was basically my first view of whatever that anime was, and I'm looking at the characters, and I was like, this looks exactly like Yu Yu Hakusho. Like I'm getting major Yu Yu Hakusho vibes here, and that's probably like my top 3 animes. I freaking love Yu Yu Hakusho, and I do a little bit of research on it, and it's the same creator of Yu Yu Hakusho and Hunter x Hunter. So I was like, well, yeah, there's 4 characters. They're all very unique. You like them all. Like, I thought that was kind of funny. I didn't want to like forget that or leave that out, but yeah, Ball Pit kind of combines a couple other games that I have played a lot actually, and when I saw the gameplay of it, I literally saw maybe 10 seconds of it, and I was like, yeah, this is a game I'm going to like. So I was throwing that out there with like the big heavy hitters. People were talking about these like big PlayStation games and Pokemon, and I was like, nah, I think Ball Pit's, like, I can tell by how the gameplay looks and just kind of like the creativity. I could feel the passion from the developer. And I think that's kind of missing a little bit, or maybe it's a little bit lost as the development sizes kind of get larger and larger. So like you'll have a development team of hundreds of people, and you have a game being made that has like $100+ million budget, and that's not even counting like the marketing budget. And there's a little bit lost there if you don't have a really strong sense of leadership that can continuously bring everyone together to focus on a singular message, or like, hey, this is how I want the game to be. It's almost a miracle, honestly, that anybody can even make video games at a large scale. But Ball Pit, so just doing a little bit of research, it's actually really nice because Kenny Sun, so the lead developer, I stumbled upon their website and was reading his blog posts, and he seems just like a nice person. And it makes me like the game even more. So I'm probably going to have a lot of positive things to say about it here. I did, quote unquote, complete the game, which we'll talk about here shortly. But seeing that passion of creating something artistic and getting it out there, and just seeing the joy of like all of your hard work coming to a head, coming to a completed release, and then seeing their success too. So Ball Pit, basically at the time of this podcast and recording, I think sold 400,000 copies, and it's probably going to go on to sell, some more. Now it is a $15 game, so I do think that has a little bit to do with it. The low entry point, I think, is actually really beneficial, and I think there's a huge market here. So the first thing I'll say is indie development has changed substantially. So if you go all the way back to even kind of before, the Nintendo Entertainment System and this kind of like modern era of video games, so this current generation that we're in of video games, which doesn't appear to be going anywhere anytime soon, which is kind of a good thing. But it does look like Microsoft's going to be. I think they're exiting the hardware space in the coming years, or they're going to outsource their hardware and have it be, like Asus making those tablets or something like that, and they're just going to do Game Pass. But long story short, there were companies that would buy arcade cabinets and and they would have, the games on them, and they were like, yo, we need more, we need ways to get more quarters out of these things. So they would actually go on and, modify the game. And, for Space Invaders, for example, they would make it faster. So it's like, hey, this is going to be Space Invaders hard mode. And ownership and IP regulation was kind of weird. So a lot of people, a great example is the creators of Doom. They were writing for or working for a magazine where they basically had to, if you subscribe to this magazine, you would also receive floppy disks that had games on them. So they were just like cranking out games every single month for this like subscription based magazine service, and they would just ship you games. So like, it's changed a lot. Now I will say, in the 90s, NES, Super Nintendo come out, and you have a lot of developers. You have Nintendo, Sega, Konami, Capcom. I mean, there's an endless amount of developers. But during that time, the large commercial-based developers basically took over for a pretty long period. I would say for like the next 20 years, if you weren't a major publisher, your you weren't gonna get your game out there. Like if you had a cool idea, like I can't even tell you how many times too, Nintendo, for example, has had in-house developers or second or third party developers that they're working closely with, and they come up with an idea like a new IP, and Nintendo just says like, well, let's throw Kirby in there, like Kirby Epic Yarn, which is an awesome and really fun Kirby game. Kirby wasn't even the main character of that game. So essentially, if you weren't going through a large publisher and selling the rights to your game, it wasn't getting made. And there was also kind of a weird time too where game prices, there wasn't a lot of low cost games. So it was either you were charging, 50 to $60 for your new launch, your new title that would be launching, and there wasn't really wiggle room. So you would have during that time a game that very clearly has a larger budget and probably should release at that 50 to $60, and then you would have games that maybe didn't cost as much as maybe didn't need that price tag, that were kind of hindered by that. And I will say the change around the time of like the Xbox 360 in that era, where Xbox Arcade and the internet was kind of becoming more popular and actually feasible to get games out there. Because I think we all just have to look back and kind of remember that the internet didn't really get huge until mid to late 2000s, and probably even a little bit past that. I mean, my gosh, I remember in like 2010, I had a data cap on my home internet of like 150 gigabytes, and that made it near impossible to stream. And that's when I want to say Netflix did have their streaming service, which had, it used to be so much better. Netflix had literally anything and everything on there, but it was like, that was the side thing, and their main thing was, hey, please rent these DVDs and mail them back in, and we'll mail you any movie you want, or you can use our whatever streaming service. But as time went on, digital media and platforms like Steam, on PC, allowed for people to kind of just download the titles and purchase them directly and eliminate a lot of red tape, I guess you would say, and reliance on having a large publisher. So there was a lot of change and kind of, things that happened during that time where, you had, I don't want to say Fable. I'm trying to think. Limbo is a great example. There started to become like, Super Meat Boy, like these indie developed games that had a market that could be sold at lower prices. And I honestly, in 2025, I think this is where the game industry has gaps. There is a high probability that Grand Theft Auto is going to come out at $100, and everybody's going to cry and complain. Nintendo's been kind of testing the waters with $70 and $80 games, and it's working. And I can kind of understand why, like when you haven't increased the cost of games, but development has changed, like so much has changed that it kind of makes sense for some of these games to be a bit more expensive. But on the inverse and the flip side, I think a game like Ball Pit launching at $15 makes way too much sense. And when you have these publishers, that have kind of traditional publishers that have gotten in the way of like, okay, well, we need to make this a bigger game. Like for a while there, every game had to have multiplayer, even if it didn't make any sense. And that actually hurt games. Like it's kind of weird to think that like I think it was The Last of Us or Uncharted had multiplayer. It's like, why? Like it doesn't need it. It's a single player story based game. That's completely fine. But Ball Pit. So let's kind of come together here and talk about the game. Ball Pit kind of combines two games I'm very familiar with. The first is Vampire Survivors, which is you have a retro style, 2D looking game that intentionally has, I don't want to say bad graphics, but retro graphics, because I actually really like the anesthetic and the art style of it. But you have a character that has a starting weapon and an ability. So one might have more HP, one might do more damage, one might have more projectiles. And in Vampire Survivors, all you do is move the character around, and all of the enemies for a 30-minute period hone in on your location, and if they bump into you, they do damage to you. If you get touched, or hit too many times, you die. You're fighting monsters. There's different levels. You can speed it up, you can slow it down, and most importantly, and the biggest thing that Ball Pit kind of borrows from and pays homage to a little bit is combining items and weapons to make more powerful versions of themselves. And that is a complete curveball. The other game that I see it kind of really borrowing from that I've actually played a decent amount to is Loop Hero, which I remember I was streaming on Twitch and I was playing Loop Hero, and it was just fun to me. Now, Loop Hero almost looks like Dwarf Fortress, which that's another throwback to if you ever... good luck Googling that. But it's a 2D game, top down, the character portraits look really awesome, but it's like this goofy looking little game, and your character goes in a loop and constantly loops around, and you add these tiles to the map, and you essentially create the adventure that they're going through. So if you put a swamp down or whatever, there's enemies that pop out of it, and you fight those enemies like on a battle screen. And as you loop, you gain additional abilities, items, etc. You can, make some combinations, you get better gear, and your goal is to just constantly do loops until you get to a boss fight and, rinse, repeat, die, collect more things. But the part that Ball Pit borrows from is there was like a town, kind of like town building, I guess you would say. So, if you throw down a forest in Loop Hero, it gives you some type of bonus. Now, if you have like, rocks or mountains or whatever, it's like, hey, it might accidentally spawn a harpy, but, you gain additional hit points, for each one of these that you have. So essentially, you're just filling out the map. Now, Ball Pit's kind of broken down into two parts. Actually playing the game and taking the characters and going through the different levels. So you kind of like drop down into these levels, and your goal is to get through all of the levels by completing it with different characters and upgrading gears and, getting to the end. And I don't really know what happened at the end. I fought some type of alien space station thing on the moon or something, and then we all get launched up, and there's beautiful rainbows, and it looks amazing. And then I saw credits, and I was pretty happy. And then you get New Game Plus, so that was cool. But ideally, what you're doing is you're also building a base slash town, and as you unlock additional characters, like say you build, you know, a a building that gives you a bonus to your character. So you kind of like you're raising your stats or something like that, or you're collecting materials. What's kind of fun is you actually have to like bounce the characters off of the buildings that you've accumulated thus far to upgrade the items, or excuse me, upgrade the buildings and build them. So it's like, hey, you need 20 hits. So you just kind of like bounce your guys around and they bounce all around your little town and bounce off of everything. So that was kind of like fun and interesting. It's really like a quick, simple, but complex and addictive gameplay style. So as you kind of go through, your goal is to basically take different characters through each of the levels, fight the final boss, and then you'll unlock gears to level up the base thing that kind of like goes underground. Now, what's interesting here is you can start pairing characters together as you build certain buildings, which this is what really like made the game even more fun. It was funny like starting off because I kind of you can change the speed of the game, so there's like slow, regular, and fast. And I mean, there would be times where I'd have to like turn it on slow because I'm like, I feel like I'm just getting my butt kicked. But as you start unlocking new characters, upgrading them, you gain the ability to take two characters together, and they each have like a starting ball that has like different abilities. And then there's baby balls too, and some of the names of this stuff is just like hilarious. So I think they had fun with it. World of Balls. But you can combine, different starting abilities and everything, and it just gets easier as it goes. But then pretty much I would play on like the fastest setting. It's just complete chaos. But the one thing that I will say is I felt like half the characters I enjoy playing the game as, and then the other half, I don't know how to describe it. I don't want to say it's not fun because I did enjoy my time with the game. But you have, a character, for example, who chooses all of the upgrades and new items and abilities himself. Then there's another character who plays the game entirely himself, and it's like you kind of want to clear like the game, the like with the rewarding and like the just like quick pick up and play. It makes you want to beat the game with like all of the characters. But then some of the characters, like, I paired the guy who plays by himself and then the guy who picks all the abilities himself, and I'm literally, like, the game's just playing itself and I'm watching it. Now, the only downside is I feel like because of how unique some of the characters are, they weren't as good with, like, the AI. Like, one of the characters, the balls actually shoot from the back. So you really need to get ready to, like, build around that character of you want to kill the enemies that are in front of you because they start hitting you and damaging you first, especially like when a boss fight comes up, because there's two bosses and then a final boss of each of the levels. But if you can't get the balls to kind of go through the enemies and get to the front, you're going to have a bad time. The game does allow you to like re-roll and banish certain items that just like maybe don't match the build of anything at all. Like if you might have a character where you're just like, I don't need this type of build. But I did find that some of the characters I didn't have as much fun playing as, especially with the character who plays the game himself. And maybe this is something else because I'm on New Game Plus and playing through and beating levels and everything. But maybe there is something that I'm missing, where I would like it more if he went to the side and played the game himself. Like I sent him out on missions and like you don't have to play as him. Like you can go back to your base and say, hey, that guy needs to go complete the fungus tree level. You go here, and then as you're playing like the regular game, he gets the completion tick and check mark, and then you get the stat boost and everything for completing the level with him. And then some of the enemies, like even there's a turn-based character, so I have to give, you know, Kenny and the team just credit here. I I am a fan of turn-based combat in video games. Final Fantasy X is, I think we did a podcast on that, but Final Fantasy X is like, traditional JRPG, but that showed me that hey, you can have turn-based combat in a modern video game and it be completely awesome. And when I saw the character, it's like, hey, you play a brick breaking game like Breakout essentially with turn-based combat, and I'm like, huh. But pairing that with like other characters, that one was really fun. Now the only downside is the battles, or the game, I guess, does take a little bit longer to complete on that. It is really fun though, and it adds like a level of strategy that is much different than just how quick paced the rest of the game is. The character that plays the game himself, he is tough to play because the AI, the whatever you would basically call like the computer intelligence, he doesn't play the game very smart. It's like you can move your character around a lot and get through tough situations if you're really careful with how you play the game, and like you move your character like away from enemies that are like coming at you. And there was just one he ended up dying and losing because I'm like, he just needs to move slightly to the left or slightly to the right, and this would solve all of my problems and we would complete this level. But he's just like, I'm just gonna stand here and get hit by this one enemy, but also not angle my balls so that they hit and kill him. So I see where they're going with it, because it's like, hey, they did really well with Ball Pit and some of the characters. And your first, like 5 characters or 6 characters in the row, it's like pretty standard. They have different abilities, but it's like nothing too crazy. But yeah, the turn based one I really liked, and the character whose balls shoot from the back, really had to pair him with another character that gave a good bonus, because I'm like, man, I just feel like all of my balls get stuck in the back, and if I can't get them through to the front and get some good damage based combos going, this is going to be a long day. But they kind of so that's basically the game. Like, all you're doing is you go back to town, you build a few extra buildings, you upgrade with your resource materials that you have, and you're constantly just like slowly upgrading stats, collecting resource materials, upgrading buildings so your characters get perks and everything like that, and then going right into the game. And I think that's one of the strong suits of this game, and it's really funny. You're kind of already seeing really, really great reviews and sales numbers out there, and the game, Ball Pit, deserves it. I think this is kind of like the sleeper fall hit, and I can't even imagine now the game industry not having some type of indie backbone going forward. With the original Nintendo Switch, and this is like so what, it came out in 2017, during that time, some of the games that I spent the most amount of time on, like Dead Cells, Enter the Gungeon's another great one. Like, I feel like there's just such a market there, and I really hope with Kenny-san and the publisher and everything like that, that they see the success of this, and as opposed to trying to commercialize the success, which I feel like has hindered and hurt so many quality developers and quality, IPs, and I'll give some examples in a second, but instead of doing that, I really think you need to, like, if I was a publisher, or if I was in the game industry at this point, I would be looking for creative partners and giving them the ability to express their creativity and uniqueness and kind of stay out of the way. Like honestly, if you have a team of 6 or 7 people, how much damage are you going to do if the game, just breaks even? And I feel like with the movie industry, the game industry, it got commercialized so much to the point where, if you didn't have multiplayer, you didn't have this, you didn't sell at least the number used to be 1 million copies, but now I feel like, developers and publishers have strayed away from new intellectual properties because of the fear of, well, if this game doesn't sell 5 or 10 million copies, then it's a complete waste of time. And right now, the way that the game industry feels is there's a handful of gigantic $100 million games being developed, almost nothing in the middle, like almost no middle class, and then these indie developers that are just coming out and mopping up, and like we might have an indie developed title this year that wins game of the year or wins the majority of game of the year awards, and I find that, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing, I'm just saying it's kind of crazy, and I feel like there is even more of a market for these type of creative developers. So my last little stamp is Ball Pit is a really fun game. Um, I feel like it wasn't very long. I feel like I put about 20 to 25 hours into, and I took my time too, completing like the main game, seeing the credits, and then now I've just been, playing it here and there with the new game plus. And it is fun, like seeing how much you've improved as a player. Like starting out, I'm like I'm getting destroyed, and then by the end, I'm like, okay, I can pick any 2 characters and put it on the fastest setting, and I'm gonna basically complete every level or come pretty darn close. But no, I think you know Ball Pit is a pretty solid example of you can have a creative idea and a unique idea and sell really well and still have that creativity. And I think these publishers should honestly be seeking these types of developers. And I think these indie developers, if it's possible. So I don't know what these contracts look like as well. Like, I don't know if they're still selling all of the rights, um, and ownership, because it used to be pretty rough where you'd have a developer, they have a cool idea, but they can't publish the game. So you go to a publisher, you'd sell the rights to them, but then they own it. And I had mentioned earlier we talk about that a little bit, but I think two of the greatest examples of you know gigantic intellectual properties that were staples in gaming for a chunk of time, one I think bigger than the other, but Halo and Gears of War. And Halo's not even made by Bungie anymore. They left. It's just like Microsoft just was beating them down of like make more Halo games. And the same thing with Gears of War. Like eventually you're like, I don't want to make 6 Gears of War spin-offs. I want to be creative and make something new. Like I have, and I like what if Cliffy B's like I have an idea for, a platforming game, and I want it to be colorful, and I don't want people to be cut up with chainsaws. Microsoft's going to be like, yeah, okay. Anyway, so you're going to make Gears of War 4 and 5, and, Halo, we're going to make a real-time strategy game called Halo Wars for some reason. But so to bring that back, I'm kind of hoping that some of these smaller developers are either able to self-publish, one, or two, keep the ownership of their intellectual property that they're creating and not having it go to the publishers. Um, because I do think there's a market for it. And I think as, we have Grand Theft Auto 5 coming out, you're going to see... I personally, I'm not a huge fan of Grand Theft Auto, but I see that game selling a ridiculous... I can see how large of an impact that this is going to have, in terms of revenue on the gaming industry. But then you have that vacuum of like, okay, there's when that game comes out, the top 10 selling games of the year, it's going to be Grand Theft Auto, and then the next closest title is like the next 9 aren't probably going to even equal what Grand Theft Auto is going to sell in the first year. So when you look at that, the way that I kind of look at it, especially like I always bring it back to Nintendo because I did play Ball Pit on the Switch. Um, Runs flawlessly, played it in tablet mode, looks great. Great art style, great sound, fun gameplay, just an overall really fun game. Obviously, talking about it, I think you should download it and support the developer. And I think we should, for those of us who have been in the game industry for a pretty long time, I think that kind of creativity needs to be rewarded. But what's most important too is it's really easy to pick up and play, and it's not expensive. So not only is it a good game in its own right, but you don't have to break the bank where, if Grand Theft Auto comes out at $100, there's going to be people that have to decide, what game am I getting this year? So all in all, I I love it. I think you should play it. I look forward. I'm really hoping that Ball Pit also gets updates. Like not necessarily DLC. DLC would be cool, but also just like updates of reworking characters or adding characters or making other levels. Like I think that would be pretty cool to see. But yeah, I think indie developers continue to show that you don't need a gigantic team. You don't need $100 million to make quality video games, and I think that's where the video game industry needs to kind of like go. Um, an example that I always used to, and I kind of end on this thought is I look at Nintendo, I look at all of their IPs, and it's like you don't need to make a $70 game for every game. Like maybe we figure out something to do with Star Fox, for example, that doesn't require all this effort and hype and like, okay, well now if we don't sell 3 million copies, Star Fox is dead. I would rather get small games that are fun, or maybe get like a Star Fox 64 style game. So to finalize and wrap up here, Ball Pit is very enjoyable. I love it. It cracks me up too that like it's based off of Vampire Survivors and Loop Hero, and I think I mentioned this before, but it's funny just seeing a game borrow anything from Loop Hero. It's a good game, but I remember I think I mentioned this before. I was streaming it and chatting, with somebody who was in chat, and I was talking to them, and they're like, "Yeah, I'm here to chat with you. Like Loop Hero is kind of boring to watch." And I'm like, me with my weird logical brain, I'm like, well, very clearly it's fun to play because look, he's spinning in a circle and there's a sense of accomplishment. I'm getting stronger. You're building this, like, and I'm like, my brain just works weird. But yeah, Ball Pit's absolutely awesome. Very enjoyable to play. I actually look forward to. I'm not going to put any pressure on anybody and say I want a sequel. I want this. I'm looking forward to the next game, but I'm hoping this is something that gets some DLC support and just support in general, because it's really worthwhile. It's a really fun game to play. But this is Big Reed with another episode of Gaming's Lost Memories, and thank you so much for listening.